My wife had just gone to the store when my daughter whispered, "We have to get out. Right now." I laughed. Why? She pointed upstairs and trembled. "We don't have time. We have to leave this house now." I grabbed the car keys and headed to the police station, and that's when it happened. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows in pale strips, catching dust motes that drifted through the air like tiny ghosts. Oliver Weller stood at the counter, watching the coffee maker sputter its last drops into the glass carafe. The machine wheezed, a sound he'd been meaning to fix for months, but never quite got around to. That was the thing about working nights at the distribution center. Time became elastic, stretched thin between sleep and waking, between what needed doing and what actually got done. The house sat in one of those quiet subdivisions outside Marion, Ohio, with a lawn stayed trimmed and the driveways held sensible cars. Neighbors waved when they passed each other getting the mail. Nobody asked questions. Nobody needed to. Everything looked normal from the outside, and that was all that mattered in a place like this. Oliver poured his coffee, black, no sugar. He developed the habit years ago when money got tight and extras like cream and sugar packets seemed wasteful. Now he preferred it this way: bitter, honest, uncomplicated. Behind him, Lucy moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. She'd already showered, already dressed in jeans and a light sweater. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore the same expression she always did these days, distant, preoccupied, like she was calculating something just out of his view. "Running to the grocery store," she announced, grabbing her purse from the counter. Her keys jangled as she pulled them from the ceramic bowl by the microwave. Oliver nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. The heat burned his tongue slightly, a small sharp pain that grounded him in the moment. "Need me to pick up anything later?" "No, I've got a list." She patted her purse. "I'll be back in an hour or so." The words were casual. Too casual. But Oliver didn't catch it then. Not the slight tension in her shoulders. Not the way she avoided lingering near him. Not the fact that she hadn't kissed him goodbye in weeks. He was tired. He was always tired. 12-hour shifts loading and unloading trucks did that to a man at 41. The front door opened and closed with its familiar creak. One more thing on a list of repairs he kept meaning to get to. Lucy's car started in the driveway, a Toyota sedan, 7 years old, reliable. The engine sound faded down the street, blending into the ambient noise of suburban morning. A neighbor's dog barking, someone's lawnmower starting up early, the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Oliver stood there in the kitchen, coffee mug warm in his hands, and felt the weight of routine settle over him like a blanket. This was his life now. Work, sleep, brief windows of wakefulness with his family. Repeat. He told himself it was worth it, that he was providing, that this was what responsibility looked like. But lately, the edges of that conviction had started to fray. He was reaching for his phone when he heard the footsteps on the stairs. Janet appeared in the doorway to the kitchen. 13 years old, with Lucy's dark hair and his own gray eyes. She wore an oversized hoodie and sweatpants, the kind of outfit kids her age lived in on weekends. But it wasn't her clothes that caught Oliver's attention. It was her hands. They were clenched into fists at her sides, knuckles bone white with tension. Her face was pale, and there was something in her eyes that Oliver had never seen before. Not quite fear, but something harder, more determined. "Dad," she said, and her voice was too quiet, too controlled. "We need to leave the house." Oliver set his coffee mug down slowly on the counter, his mind struggling to shift gears. "What's going on, sweetheart?" Janet stepped further into the kitchen. Her jaw was tight, and Oliver could see the muscles working beneath the skin. She was trying to hold something together, something that wanted badly to come apart. "Mom isn't going to the store," Janet said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Oliver felt a flicker of confusion, then the first spark of something colder. He forced a chuckle, though it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Then where is she going?" Janet's eyes didn't leave his face. She looked toward the hallway, then back at him, and when she spoke again, Her voice had dropped even lower, as if the walls themselves might be listening. To make sure we don't come back. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them. Oliver heard the refrigerator humming, heard the clock ticking above the sink, heard his own breathing suddenly loud in his ears. The coffee maker made a final gurgling sound as the heating element clicked off. "Sit down," Oliver said, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "Tell me what you mean." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten countless dinners, where Janet had done homework while Oliver helped with math problems he barely remembered from his own school days. The wood surface was scarred with years of use. Rings from hot mugs, a gouge where Janet had once dropped the knife, faint pencil marks from when she was learning to write her name. Janet didn't cry. That was what worried Oliver most. 13-year-old girls cried. About friends, about school, about nothing at all sometimes. But Janet sat there with dry eyes and a rigid spine, and Oliver recognized the posture. It was the same one he used at work when management was breathing down his neck, when he needed to hold it together no matter what. "She's been seeing someone," Janet said, her voice flat and factual. "A man named Kyle Mercer. He comes over when you're working nights." The words landed like physical blows, but Oliver kept his face neutral. Years of working customer service before the distribution center had taught him how to absorb verbal abuse without flinching. This was worse, though. This cut deeper than any angry customer ever could. "How long have you known?" He kept his hands flat on the table, willing them not to shake. "Since January." Janet stared at the wood grain between her fingers, tracing one of the old coffee stains with her thumbnail. "I heard them arguing last night. About money. About how you were in the way." Oliver felt shame before anger, and that surprised him. Shame that he'd missed this, that he'd been so caught up in work and exhaustion that his own home had become foreign territory. Shame that his daughter had carried this burden alone for months. What exactly did they say? He needed details, needed facts. His mind was already trying to organize this chaos into something manageable, something he could understand and respond to. Janet's thumbnail pressed harder into the table surface. "Mom said once you were gone, everything would be easier. She said they could finally move forward." Kyle asked if she was sure about the plan, and she said yes. "She said you'd never see it coming." The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just Oliver's perception shifting. He'd been tired before. Now he felt something else, a cold clarity that sharpened everything around him. The morning light seemed brighter. The sounds of the house seemed louder. Every detail suddenly mattered. "She said something else," Janet added, and now her voice cracked just slightly. "She said it would look like an accident, that they'd thought it through." Oliver reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. Her fingers were ice cold despite the warmth of the kitchen. "Get your backpack," he said quietly. "Pack clothes for a few days. We're leaving." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere I can think." Janet stood up quickly, relief flooding her features. She'd been carrying this alone, Oliver realized, waiting for him to wake up, to notice, to do something. How many nights had she lain awake, listening for sound in the house, wondering if today would be the day her father didn't come home from work? As she headed upstairs, Oliver pulled out his phone. His hands were steady now. The shock had burned off, leaving behind something harder and more focused. He scrolled through his contacts until he found his sister's number. Rachel answered on the third ring. "Ollie, it's early. I need a favor," Oliver said. "Can Janet and I stay with you for a few days?" "I'll explain when we get there." There was a pause on the other end. Rachel knew him well enough to hear what he wasn't saying. "How soon can you be here?" 30 minutes. "I'll put coffee on." Oliver drove across town with Janet silent in the passenger seat, her backpack clutched on her lap like a shield. He grabbed a duffel bag from the garage, thrown in clothes and toiletries without really thinking about what he was packing. His mind was elsewhere, cycling through memories, re-examining conversations, searching for the signs he'd missed. Rachel's house was smaller than theirs, a ranch-style place she'd bought after her divorce 3 years ago. She met them at the door, took one look at Oliver's face, and simply nodded. "Guest room's ready," she said. "Janet, honey, why don't you go get settled? Your uncle probably needs to talk boring adult stuff." Janet glanced at Oliver, who nodded. Once she was out of earshot, Rachel led him to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked suspiciously fresh, as if she'd started brewing at the moment they hung up. "Tell me," Rachel said simply. Oliver told her. The words came out mechanical, detached, like he was describing something that had happened to someone else. Lucy's affair, Janet's discovery, the overheard conversation about making him disappear. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression growing progressively darker. When he finished, she set her coffee mug down hard enough that liquid sloshed over the rim. "You need to call the police." "And tell them what? That my wife's having an affair? That's not illegal. That my daughter overheard a conversation that might have been hypothetical?" Oliver shook his head. "They'd take a report. Maybe send someone to talk to Lucy. And then what? If she's actually planning something, we just tip her off. So what are you going to do?" Oliver looked out the kitchen window at Rachel's small backyard. A bird feeder hung from a tree branch, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Life went on. The world kept turning. People went to work, mowed their lawns, fed birds. And some people, apparently, plotted to murder their spouses. "I'm going to find proof," he said quietly. "Real evidence. Something the police can actually use." That sounds dangerous. More dangerous than going home and pretending everything's normal. Oliver turned back to his sister. "Janet saved my life this morning, Rachel. The least I can do is be smart about what comes next." That night, alone on Rachel's couch with a borrowed blanket pulled up to his chest, Oliver replayed the past year in his mind. The late text that Lucy explained away as friends having emergencies. The new passwords on her phone and laptop, instituted suddenly after years of sharing everything. The unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. Not large enough to trigger immediate alarm, but frequent enough that their savings had dwindled from a modest cushion to nearly nothing. He thought about the life insurance policy Lucy had suggested they increase last fall. "We have Janet to think about," she'd said reasonably. "What if something happened to you?" Oliver had agreed because it made sense, because it was responsible, because he'd trusted her. The policy was for $200,000. Enough to start over, Oliver thought. Enough to run away with someone new. This was an impulse. This wasn't a moment of passion or poor judgment. This was planning. This was methodical. This was his wife of 15 years, deciding he was worth more dead than alive. And Oliver had never been the kind of man who reacted without proof. Even now, with his world cracking apart, he needed evidence. He needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before he made his move. Because if he was going to destroy Lucy's plan, he needed to do it right. He needed to be patient, thorough, and absolutely certain. He closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, he began making a list in his mind of everything he needed to do, every place he needed to look, every question he needed to answer. By morning, the list was long and detailed, and Oliver was ready to start checking items off. The next morning, Oliver drove back to the house. He called Lucy from Rachel's place, keeping his voice normal, apologetic. "Something came up with Rachel," he'd explained. "Family emergency. I stayed over to help. Janet wanted to come too. You know how close they are." Lucy had accepted the explanation without question, her voice relieved. "Oh, of course. Take your time. I'll be here when you get back." Now Oliver stood in their driveway, looking at the house with new eyes. It looked the same as it had yesterday. Beige siding, dark shutters, a front porch with 2 chairs they never used. But everything was different now. This wasn't home anymore. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. He went inside. Lucy was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries. She'd actually gone to the store at some point, Oliver noted. Good cover. Make the lie real enough that questions wouldn't arise. "How's Rachel?" Lucy asked, not looking up from the bags. "Managing. You know how it is." Oliver watched her movements, the way she kept her back to him, the slight tension in her shoulders. Was that guilt? Anxiety? Or just his imagination now that he knew what he was looking for? "I'm going to grab a shower," he said. "Work tonight. Already? You got home. Overtime. We need the money." Something flickered across Lucy's face, disappointment, maybe, or frustration. Then it was gone, replaced by a sympathetic smile. "You work too hard, Oliver." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he went upstairs, moved past Janet's empty room. She was staying at Rachel's for now, somewhere safe, and entered the bedroom he'd shared with Lucy for 15 years. The room was neat, organized. Lucy had always been particular about keeping things tidy. But now Oliver looked at it differently. What secrets did this space hold? He started with the dresser. Lucy's side, her drawers. He moved carefully, methodically, remembering where everything was so he could put it back exactly as he found it. Clothes, jewelry box, a small stack of magazines. Nothing unusual. The nightstand yielded more. Beneath a paperback novel and a box of tissues, Oliver found a new phone, a cheap prepaid model, the kind you could buy at any big box store with cash. He turned it on, his pulse quickening. It was password protected. Oliver tried Lucy's birthday. Nothing. Janet's birthday. Nothing. He tried a few more combinations, then stopped. Better not to lock himself out. He turned it off, photographed it with his own phone for evidence, and put it back exactly where he'd found it. The closet came next. Lucy's clothes on one side, his on the other. He went through her coat pockets, her purse collection, the shoe boxes stacked on a shelf. In a designer handbag she rarely used, a birthday gift from years ago that had seemed extravagant at the time, he found receipts. Dinner at a steakhouse he'd never heard of. 2 entries, mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, when Oliver had been at work. Another receipt for a hotel 2 towns over. Just one night, 3 months ago. The date jogged his memory. He'd worked a double shift that weekend, covering for someone who'd called in sick. Oliver photographed everything with his phone, making sure the dates and amounts were clearly visible. Then he replaced the receipts and continued his search. In the garage, tucked behind a box of old Christmas decorations, he found more evidence. Bank statements that didn't match the ones Lucy had shown him for their joint account. A second credit card he'd never heard about, the bills showing charges at restaurants, stores, and gas stations in patterns that didn't match Lucy's supposed schedule. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. Money left trails. People left footprints. And Oliver was finding them all. Over the next 3 days, while maintaining the appearance of normalcy, Oliver assembled his case. He checked their home computer when Lucy was out, recovering deleted emails and messages from the recycling bin. He logged into their online banking and discovered transfers to an account he didn't recognize. Small amounts, $50 or $100 at a time, but adding up to thousands over the past 6 months. He went through the phone bills, highlighting calls and texts to one number that appeared repeatedly, always at times when Oliver was at work. The number was registered to a Kyle Mercer address in nearby Galleon. But the real breakthrough came on the 4th night. Oliver was pretending to sleep, lying in bed next to Lucy with his eyes closed and his breathing steady. He'd learned to fake sleep during his years working odd shifts. Sometimes it was the only way to get rest when the neighbors were noisy or Janet was having friends over. Lucy's phone buzzed on her nightstand. Oliver heard her pick it up, saw the faint glow of the screen through his barely open eyelids. She slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb him, and went into the bathroom. The door closed, but not quite all the way. Through the crack, Oliver heard her voice, low and urgent. "I can't do this much longer." No, he doesn't suspect anything. Next week, when he's working the overnight, yes, I'm sure. Once it's done, we can finally breathe. Oliver's heartbeat thundered in his ears, but he kept his breathing even, kept his body relaxed. Lucy returned to bed 10 minutes later, and Oliver lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, processing what he'd just heard. Confirmation. Direct, clear, unmistakable confirmation. The next morning, he drove to Rachel's house, his laptop bag in the passenger seat. Janet met him at the door, her eyes searching his face for information. "Did you find anything?" she asked quietly. Oliver nodded. "Enough. More than enough." Inside, he spread the evidence across Rachel's kitchen table. Photographs of receipts, bank statements, phone bills. Screenshots of deleted messages and emails. A timeline he constructed showing Lucy's whereabouts on days when she claimed to be at yoga or book club or the grocery store. Rachel stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. "This is extensive. This is methodical," Oliver corrected. "She's been planning this for months. Maybe longer." Janet sat down at the table, picking up one of the printed bank statements. Her hands were steadier than they'd been a few days ago, Oliver noted. Knowing her father believed her, knowing he was taking action, it had steadied her. What about the phone call you heard? Rachel asked Janet gently. Janet set down the statement. They were in the living room. I'd gone downstairs to get water. They didn't know I was there. She looked at Oliver. Kyle asked if she was sure about the timing. Mom said you'd be at work all night on Thursday. That's tomorrow. And that she'd make sure you took your sleeping pills when you got home Friday morning. She said you always took them after overnight shifts. Oliver felt his stomach tighten. He did take sleeping pills after overnight shifts, had been doing it for years. The distribution center was loud, and his body never fully adjusted to flipping between day and night schedules. The pills helped him get solid sleep during daylight hours. She said by Friday afternoon, it would be done. Janet continued, her voice mechanical. She said they positioned everything so it would look like an accident. Something about carbon monoxide in the garage. Rachel sucked in a sharp breath. Jesus Christ. Oliver's mind was already racing ahead. The garage. Their attached garage, where Lucy had suggested last month that they start parking his truck instead of leaving it in the driveway. It'll help with the winter weather, she'd said. And it's safer. He'd agreed, thinking nothing of it. But a running engine in an attached garage, with someone sleeping upstairs under the influence of sleeping pills. She'd have to disable the detector, Rachel said, following the same thought. Or just remove the batteries and claim she didn't notice. Oliver replied, the house is old. Things break. Who would question it? The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were discussing settling over them like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't hypothetical anymore. This wasn't paranoia or misunderstanding. This was a concrete plan with a timeline, and that timeline was running out. You need to call the police, Rachel said firmly. Now, today. You have evidence. Not enough, Oliver said. He pulled another document from his laptop bag, a printed summary he'd prepared. What I have proves the affair. It proves financial deception. But conspiracy to commit murder? That's harder. Janet heard a conversation, but it's hearsay. A defense lawyer would tear it apart. Lucy would claim they were talking about a movie plot, or a hypothetical scenario, or that Janet misunderstood. So what do you need? Rachel demanded. Oliver met her eyes. I need Kyle to talk. Finding Kyle Mercer wasn't difficult. The man worked at an auto parts store 20 minutes away. Oliver had learned this through a simple Facebook search combined with the address from the phone records. Kyle was 32, divorced, no kids. His social media showed a man who liked motorcycles, craft beer, and apparently married women. Oliver waited in the parking lot of the auto parts store, watching through the large front windows as Kyle helped customers process sales, restock shelves. He was average height, average build, with a beard and tattoos visible on his forearms. Nothing special, nothing remarkable, just a man who'd helped Oliver's wife plan his murder. At 5:30, Kyle's shift ended. He came out the employee entrance, keys in hand, heading for a pickup truck parked near the back of the lot. Oliver intercepted him halfway there. Kyle Mercer. Kyle stopped, his expression shifting from casual to wary in an instant. Who's asking? Oliver Weller. He watched the name register, watched Kyle's face go pale beneath the parking lot lights. Lucy's husband. Kyle took a step back, his hands coming up slightly. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. Neither do I, Oliver said calmly. I just want to talk. 5 minutes. I've got nothing to say to you. Then just listen. Oliver pulled out his phone, called up one of the screenshots he'd prepared. This is a text conversation between you and my wife. You're discussing when I'll be at work, what my schedule looks like, how much life insurance money there is. Does that refresh your memory? Kyle's eyes darted to the phone, then to Oliver's face, then around the parking lot, as if looking for witnesses or escape routes. I could go to the police with this right now, Oliver continued, his voice still even, still reasonable. I could show them everything, the financial records, the messages, my daughter's testimony about what she heard. But here's the thing, Kyle. I don't think you're the mastermind here. I think you're being used. I don't know what you're talking about, Kyle said, but his voice lacked conviction. She's setting you up to take the fall, Oliver said. Think about it. You're the one with the motive to want me gone. You want my wife, my house, my life. When something happens to me, who do you think the police will look at first? Not the grieving widow, the boyfriend. Kyle's jaw clenched. Oliver could see the wheels turning in his mind, could see the exact moment doubt started creeping in. She told you it would look like an accident, Oliver pressed. That no one would suspect anything. But accidents get investigated, Kyle. Especially when there's a life insurance policy involved. And when they start digging, when they find the affair, when they see the financial transactions, all the evidence points straight to you. She said. Kyle started, then stopped. What did she say? Kyle looked around again, then back at Oliver. Fear had replaced the initial wariness. She said we'd be careful, that there was no way it could trace back to us. Us, Oliver repeated. Or just you, because from where I'm standing, everything I've found connects you to this plan. Lucy's been very careful to keep her own hands clean. You're the one making the phone calls, sending the texts. You're the one she'll testify against when this all goes wrong. Kyle's face crumbled. He wasn't a hardened criminal, Oliver realized. He was just a fool who'd fallen for the wrong woman and gotten in over his head. I didn't want. Kyle's voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Then help me stop it, Oliver said. Talk to me. Tell me everything. I'll make sure the police know you cooperated. Kyle looked at him for a long moment, and Oliver could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. Self-preservation warred with whatever loyalty he felt toward Lucy. Self-preservation won. Not here, Kyle said quietly. Not where someone might see. They went to a diner on the edge of town, one of those 24-hour places where the coffee was terrible and the booze had cracks in the vinyl seats. Oliver sat across from Kyle, his phone on the table between them, recording app running. For your protection as much as mine, Oliver said when Kyle eyed the phone nervously. This way there's no question about what was said. Kyle ordered coffee he didn't drink. Oliver did the same. They sat there in the fluorescent lighting, surrounded by the dinner rush of truckers and third-shift workers starting their evenings, and Kyle talked. He'd met Lucy at a gym 6 months ago. She'd approached him, started conversations, seemed interested in his life. The affair had started quickly. Stolen afternoons at cheap hotels, messages that made Kyle feel wanted and alive in a way his marriage never had. She said you didn't appreciate her, Kyle said, not meeting Oliver's eyes. That you ignored her, worked all the time, never paid attention. Oliver felt a flicker of anger, but pushed it down. This wasn't the time. What did the talk about money start? Maybe 3 months in. She said you two were struggling financially, that she was worried about the future. She mentioned the life insurance policy. So it was a shame all that money was just sitting there, waiting for something to happen. And you didn't find that suspicious? Kyle's silence was answer enough. She started talking more seriously about 6 weeks ago, Kyle continued. Said she couldn't live this way anymore, that something had to change. She laid out the plan. Make it look like an accident, wait a respectful amount of time. Then we could be together openly. Use the insurance money to start fresh somewhere new. Carbon monoxide in the garage, Oliver said flatly. Kyle flinched. She said you'd never feel it, that you'd just fall asleep and not wake up. She made it sound humane. Oliver's hands clenched into fists under the table, but his face remained neutral. What was your role supposed to be? Alibi, mostly. I was supposed to be somewhere very public tomorrow night, somewhere with cameras and witnesses. A bar she picked out, where I'd pay with credit card. She said that way if questions ever came up, I'd be in the clear. While she killed me. Kyle looked up finally, his eyes red. I never thought she'd actually do it. I thought she was just talking, you know? Venting. People say things they don't mean all the time. Except she meant it, Oliver said. She bought a burner phone. She transferred money into a separate account. She disabled the carbon monoxide detector in my house 3 days ago. These aren't the actions of someone just talking. Kyle's face went even paler. She disabled the detector already? You didn't know that part, did you? Oliver leaned forward slightly. She's been moving the plan forward without telling you everything. Because you're not her partner, Kyle. You're her patsy. The recording ran for another 20 minutes as Kyle spilled everything he knew, dates, conversations, financial promises Lucy had made. When they finally left the diner, Kyle looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what he'd helped set in motion. What happens now? He asked in the parking lot. Now you go to the police with me, Oliver said. You tell them everything you just told me. You cooperate fully. That's your only chance of not spending the next decade in prison. Kyle nodded slowly. He'd already accepted his fate, Oliver realized. Whatever fantasy he'd been living with Lucy had shattered completely, replaced by the harsh reality of attempted murder charges. They drove in separate vehicles to the Marion Police Department. It was just after 8 in the evening. The station was quiet, just a few officers on duty and a receptionist at the front desk who looked up in surprise when Oliver and Kyle walked in together. "I need to report a conspiracy to commit murder," Oliver said calmly. "And I have the evidence and a witness to prove it." The detective's name was Sarah Miller, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to Oliver's initial statement, then looked at Kyle, who sat slumped in his chair like a man who'd already been convicted. "This is a serious accusation," Detective Miller said. "You understand that if we pursue this, there's no going back." "I understand," Oliver replied. "My wife is planning to kill me tomorrow night. I have evidence and a witness. How much more serious does it need to be?" They moved to an interview room. Oliver laid out his evidence methodically. The phone records, the financial documents, the receipts, the screenshots of deleted messages. Janet's written statement about the conversation she'd overheard. The recording of Kyle's confession at the diner. Detective Miller took notes, asked pointed questions, occasionally left the room to consult with other officers. Hours passed. Oliver drank terrible coffee from paper cups and repeated his story multiple times to different people. Kyle did the same in another room. Finally, near midnight, Detective Miller came back into the interview room where Oliver waited. "We're going to bring your wife in for questioning," she said. "Based on what you've provided in Mr. Mercer's statement, there's sufficient probable cause for an arrest." Oliver felt something release in his chest, tension he'd been carrying for days without fully realizing it. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. We'll go to your house, present her with a warrant. You need to not be there. Can you arrange that? I'm staying with my sister. I can make sure I'm out all day." "Good." Detective Miller sat down across from him. "I need to be clear with you, Mr. Weller. The case we have is strong, but it's not ironclad. A good defense attorney will challenge the hearsay evidence, question the admissibility of some of the recordings, argue that the deleted messages show intent to have an affair, but not intent to commit murder. This is going to be a fight. I understand." "Do you?" She studied his face. "Because once we arrest her, your life is going to become very public. Your daughter will likely have to testify. Your marriage, your finances, your private life, all of it will be examined in court. People will have opinions. The media might get involved. Are you prepared for that?" Oliver thought about Janet, about the fear in her eyes when she'd warned him, about the months she'd carried this secret alone. He thought about the sleeping pills Lucy had encouraged him to take, about the disabled carbon monoxide detector, about waking up Friday morning, if he'd followed her plan, to a death that would have looked like a tragic accident. "I'm prepared," he said. They arrested Lucy at work the next morning. Oliver wasn't there to see it, but he heard about it later from Detective Miller. Lucy had been in the break room at the insurance office where she worked part-time, having coffee with co-workers, when 2 uniformed officers walked in with a warrant. She'd screamed, denied everything, claimed it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, that her husband was having some kind of mental breakdown and making false accusations. "She blamed you," Detective Miller told Oliver later that afternoon. "Said you were jealous and controlling, that you were punishing her for wanting to leave the marriage. She accused you of fabricating evidence." "Did she mention Kyle?" "She claimed he was stalking her, that she'd been trying to get away from him, and you'd somehow gotten the wrong idea." Detective Miller's expression was skeptical. It might have worked, except Mr. Mercer's statement directly contradicted her story. And the physical evidence doesn't lie. "We found a burner phone exactly where you said it would be. We found the bank records. And we found a receipt for a carbon monoxide detector purchased 2 months ago, presumably the one she replaced after disabling yours." Oliver absorbed this information in silence. He was sitting in Rachel's living room, Janet beside him on the couch. His daughter had been quiet since learning of her mother's arrest, processing emotions Oliver couldn't begin to guess at. "How did you reconcile the mother who'd raised you with the woman who'd tried to kill your father? What happens now?" Rachel asked. "She'll be arraigned tomorrow." Given the nature of the charges and the evidence, I expect bail will be set high. If she can't make it, she stays in custody until trial. And if she does make bail, then there'll be conditions. No contact with Mr. Weller or his daughter, surrender of passport, regular check-ins. But between you and me, I don't think she's coming up with bail money. The accounts she has access to are frozen, and I doubt she has friends or family willing to put up that kind of cash for attempted murder charges. After Detective Miller left, the three of them sat in Rachel's living room, the television on, but no one watching it. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Oliver wondered if Lucy could see the sunset from her jail cell, and then wondered why he cared. "Dad," Janet's voice was small. "Are you okay?" Oliver looked at his daughter, really looked at her. 13 years old, and she had to carry the burden of protecting him. 13 years old, and she'd had to choose between her parents. That wasn't fair. None of this was fair. "I'm okay," he said, and found that it was mostly true. "We're safe. That's what matters." "Do you hate her?" Janet asked. It was a fair question, and Oliver considered it carefully before answering. "I hate what she tried to do. I hate that she put you in this position. But I don't hate her. I don't think I have the energy for that. I'm just tired, sweetheart, and sad. And really, really glad you were brave enough to tell me." Janet leaned against him, and Oliver wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat there as darkness fell outside, and Oliver thought about the life he'd thought he had versus the life he actually had. The gap between the two was vast and painful, but at least now he knew where he stood. At least now he was alive to figure out what came next. The weeks leading up to the trial blurred together in a haze of legal consultations and procedural motions. Lucy had hired an attorney, a slick-looking man named Thomas Brennan who specialized in defending the indefensible. He filed motion after motion, trying to get evidence suppressed, trying to get charges reduced, trying to delay the trial. None of it worked. The prosecution had assigned a senior attorney named Margaret Walsh, a woman who'd spent 2 decades putting away murderers and attempted murderers. She was thorough, prepared, and utterly unmoved by the defense's arguments. Oliver met with her several times in the weeks before trial. She explained what to expect, how cross-examination would work, what questions he might face. "They're going to try to paint you as a neglectful husband," she warned. "They'll say you worked too much, ignored your wife, drove her to seek comfort elsewhere. They'll try to make the jury sympathetic to her. Will it work? Not if I can help it." Margaret's smile was cold. "Infidelity isn't illegal. Murder is. We have evidence of planning, of intent, of concrete actions taken to end your life. A jury isn't going to ignore that just because you work night shifts." The trial began on a cold morning in February. Oliver sat in the courtroom wearing a suit Rachel had helped him pick out. Nothing too expensive, nothing too shabby. Just a working man who'd nearly been murdered by his wife. Lucy sat at the defense table in clothes Oliver didn't recognize. A conservative navy dress, her hair styled professionally. She'd lost weight in jail, her face gaunt and pale. When their eyes met across the courtroom, she looked away quickly, her expression bitter. The prosecution laid out their case methodically over 3 days. Bank records showing the secret account. Phone records showing the thousands of calls and texts between Lucy and Kyle. The burner phone. The hotel receipts. Kyle's testimony, detailed and damning, about the conversations they'd had and the plan they'd made. Janet testified on the 4th day. She was nervous. Oliver could see her hands shaking as she took the oath, but her voice was clear and steady as she recounted the conversation she'd overheard between her mother and Kyle. She said it would look like an accident, Janet testified. She said by Friday afternoon, Dad would be gone and they could finally move forward. During cross-examination, Brennan tried to rattle her, suggesting she'd misunderstood, that she was confused, that she was siding with her father because he'd turned her against her mother. Janet looked at him with the same steady gaze she'd given her father that morning in the kitchen and said simply, "I know what I heard." Oliver testified on the 5th day. He walked the jury through his discovery of the affair, his methodical collection of evidence, his confrontation with Kyle. He explained about the disabled carbon monoxide detector, about the sleeping pills Lucy had encouraged him to take, about the pattern of behavior that pointed to one inevitable conclusion. Brennan's cross-examination was brutal. He asked about Oliver's work schedule, suggesting Oliver had been an absent husband and father. He asked about arguments Oliver and Lucy had had, trying to paint Oliver as controlling or aggressive. He asked why Oliver hadn't gone to the police immediately when Janet first told him about the affair. "Because I needed evidence," Oliver said calmly. "I needed to be sure, and I needed to protect my daughter while I figured out what was happening." "Or perhaps you needed time to fabricate a story?" Brennan suggested. "I fabricated nothing. The evidence speaks for itself." The prosecution rested after 6 days. The defense put on their case. Character witnesses who said Lucy was a good mother and involved community member, a psychologist who suggested Lucy might have been experiencing some kind of mental health crisis, a financial expert who argued the money transfers were ambiguous and could have innocent explanations. None of it mattered. The jury saw through it. Oliver could tell by the way they looked at Lucy during testimony, not with sympathy, but with the cold assessment of people who'd seen the evidence and drawn their own conclusions. During closing arguments, Margaret Walsh stood before the jury and summarized the case in clear, unequivocal terms. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was planning. This was calculation. This was a woman who decided her husband was worth more dead than alive, and she took concrete steps to make that happen. She disabled safety equipment in his home. She manipulated him into using sleeping medication. She coordinated with her lover to establish an alibi. And if not for the bravery of a 13-year-old girl, Oliver Weller would be dead. She paused, letting that sink in. The defense wants you to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that Lucy Weller was just a lonely woman having an affair who got caught up in dramatic talk with her boyfriend. But the evidence shows otherwise. The evidence shows a conspiracy. The evidence shows intent. And the evidence shows that Lucy Weller came dangerously close to committing the perfect murder. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud. The courtroom stayed silent as the verdict was read. Lucy's face crumpled, and she reached for her attorney's arm as if the room was spinning around her. Oliver sat perfectly still, feeling nothing except a distant sense of completion. It was over. Finally, completely over. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Oliver sat in the same courtroom, in the same seat, and listened as the judge reviewed the evidence and the verdict. "Mrs. Weller," the judge said, looking directly at Lucy, "you engaged in a calculated plan to murder your husband for financial gain. You exploited your position of trust as his wife. You endangered not only him, but potentially your daughter as well, had she been in the house when you executed your plan. This court finds no mitigating factors that would warrant leniency." The sentence was 20 years, eligible for parole after 12. Lucy would be in her 60s by the time she might see freedom again. She didn't look at Oliver as they led her away. Her shoulders were slumped, her face blank with shock. Whatever life she'd imagined with Kyle, whatever future she'd been planning, it had evaporated completely. Oliver walked out of the courthouse with Janet and Rachel. It was a bright afternoon, the sun sharp and clear in a blue sky. Spring was coming. Life was going to continue. "Is it weird that I don't feel happy?" Janet asked quietly. "No," Oliver said. "It's not weird at all." They drove home in silence, not to the house in Marion, but to the new apartment Oliver had rented across town. It was smaller than the house, a 2-bedroom place in a modest complex. But it was theirs. It was safe. And it was far enough from the old neighborhood that they didn't have to see the curious stares of neighbors who'd watched the news coverage of the trial. That night, after Janet had gone to bed, Oliver sat on the small balcony of their apartment, a cup of tea cooling in his hands. He thought about the past few months, about how quickly a normal life could transform into something unrecognizable. He thought about Lucy, not the woman who tried to kill him, but the woman he'd married 16 years ago. Where had that person gone? Had she ever really existed, or had Oliver just seen what he wanted to see? He didn't have answers. Maybe he never would. But he had his daughter. He had his life. And he had the chance to start over, to build something real and honest and true. That would have to be enough. 6 months after the trial, Oliver stood in the kitchen of their apartment, making breakfast for Janet before school. The rhythm of it was comfortable now. Eggs, toast, orange juice, the smell of coffee filling the small space. Simple, honest, real. Janet came out of her room with her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked older now, Oliver thought. The past year had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with birthdays. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, grabbing a piece of toast from the plate. "Are you working today?" "Afternoon shift. I'll be home before dinner." Things had changed at the distribution center after the trial. Management had been surprisingly understanding, adjusting Oliver's schedule to eliminate the overnight shifts. He took a pay cut, but the trade-off was worth it. He was home when Janet needed him, present in a way he hadn't been before. They drove to school together, the radio playing softly, neither of them feeling the need to fill the silence with conversation. That was something else that had changed. They were comfortable with quiet now, with just existing in the same space without forcing words. "Dad," Janet said as they pulled up to the school, "I've been thinking about Mom and everything that happened." She stared out the windshield at the students streaming into the building. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Oliver considered the question carefully. He'd learned not to give Janet easy answers, not to dismiss her complex feelings about her mother. "I wish you didn't have to go through what you went through," he said finally. "I wish you'd never had to carry that burden. But do I wish things had turned out differently? No, because the alternative was me dying, and you potentially being left alone with someone who proved she couldn't be trusted. So no matter how hard this has been, I'm glad we're both here and we're both safe." Janet nodded slowly. "She wrote me a letter. From prison." Oliver felt his stomach tighten. "When?" "Last week. The counselor at school gave it to me. She said it's my choice whether to read it or not, but that I should tell you about it either way." "Have you read it?" "Not yet. I'm not sure I want to." Oliver reached over and took his daughter's hand. "That's entirely your decision. But whatever you decide, I'm here. If you want to read it, if you want to throw it away, if you want to save it for later when you're ready, all of that is okay." "What would you do?" "I don't know," Oliver admitted. "Part of me would want to know what she has to say, but part of me would worry that reading it would just open old wounds. There's no right answer here, kiddo." Janet squeezed his hand, then let go and grabbed her backpack. "Thanks, Dad. I'll think about it." He watched her walk into the school, joining a group of friends near the entrance. She was laughing at something one of them said, her shoulders relaxed, her smile genuine. She was healing. Slowly, but surely she was healing. Later that afternoon, Oliver sat in a small cafe near the distribution center, waiting for Rachel. She called during his lunch break, asking if they could meet before his shift. She arrived 10 minutes late, looking harried but smiling. "Sorry, got stuck at work." "No problem." Oliver gestured to the coffee he'd already ordered for her. "What's up?" Rachel took a sip, then set the cup down carefully. "I wanted to check in, see how you're really doing." "I'm fine, Oliver." He smiled slightly. "I'm actually fine. Better than I was a month ago, better than I'll probably be next month. It's a process." "And Janet, she's struggling with some stuff, but she's talking to her counselor. She has friends. She's doing her homework. All things considered, she's remarkable." Rachel studied him for a moment. "You know you're allowed to not be okay, right? You went through something traumatic. You're allowed to fall apart a little." "I already fell apart," Oliver said quietly. "I did it in private, in the middle of the night when Janet couldn't hear me. I had my moment of breaking down and questioning everything. And then I put myself back together because someone had to, and I'm the only parent she has left. That's very noble and also completely exhausting." "Probably," Oliver shrugged. "But it's working. We're making it. Some days are harder than others, but we're making it." They talked for another half hour about inconsequential things. Rachel's job, Janet's upcoming school play, the apartment complex's decision to repaint all the units. Normal conversation. Normal life. The kind of mundane stability that Oliver had once taken for granted and now treasured like gold. When he got to work, his supervisor pulled him aside with news that the company was offering him a promotion, shift lead, better pay, day hours only. You've been reliable, the supervisor said. Never complain. Always show up. Handle problems without drama. That's exactly what we need in leadership. Oliver accepted on the spot. The pay increase would help. The stable hours would help more. He was building a new life, piece by piece, and every small improvement mattered. That evening, he came home to find Janet at the kitchen table with homework spread out in front of her. She looked up when he entered, and there was something different in her expression. Lighter, almost. "I threw away the letter," she said without preamble. Oliver set down his keys and lunch bag. "Yeah." I realized I don't need to know what she has to say. Not right now. Maybe not ever. She made her choices, and I'm making mine. And my choice is to focus on the people who are actually here for me. Oliver felt a surge of pride, so intense, it almost hurt. This was his daughter, brave, clear-eyed, choosing her own path forward. "That sounds like a very wise decision," he said. "Plus, if I want to hear apologies and excuses, I can always read it later. But right now, I'm kind of busy living my life." They ordered pizza that night, watched a movie Janet picked out, and went to bed at reasonable hours. Routine. Stability. The building blocks of a life that felt increasingly solid beneath Oliver's feet. A year after the trial, on a Saturday afternoon in spring, Oliver and Janet stood in the backyard of a small house they'd just bought. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a yard that needed work. But it was theirs. No landlord, no apartment complex rules, no memories of what had come before. Janet was already planting a garden along the fence line. Oliver was mentally calculating how much paint they'd need to freshen up the interior. It was all very domestic, very normal, very much the opposite of the chaos that had defined the previous year. "You know what's weird?" Janet said, kneeling to examine the soil near where she wanted to plant tomatoes. "I don't think about it as much anymore." "What happened with Mom?" "Some days I barely think about it at all." "Is that bad?" Oliver asked. "I don't think so. It just means I'm moving on, right? That's healthy. That's very healthy." She looked up at him, squinting against the afternoon sun. "Do you think about it?" "Sometimes. Less than I used to." Oliver sat down on the back steps, watching his daughter examine the yard with the seriousness of someone planning a major project. "Mostly I think about this. About what we're building now. About the future instead of the past." "Good." Janet stood up, brushing dirt off her hands. "Because the past sucked, and the future looks a lot better." Oliver laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from genuine amusement rather than politeness or obligation. "It really does." That night, lying in bed in his new house, Oliver thought about the question Detective Miller had asked him more than a year ago. Was he prepared for his life to become public, for everything to be examined, for the hard road ahead? He'd said yes then because he had to, because there was no other choice. But now, with distance and perspective, he could say yes and actually mean it. The hard road had been worth walking. The examination had been worth enduring. The price of survival had been steep, but Oliver had paid it and come out the other side. He thought about Lucy, locked in a prison cell hundreds of miles away. Did she think about what she'd lost? Did she understand the magnitude of what she'd tried to do? Or did she still see herself as the victim, the one who'd been wronged? Oliver didn't know, and increasingly, he didn't care. She'd made her choices. He'd made his, and his choices had led him here, to a modest house with a daughter who was thriving, to a job that provided stability, to a life that was simple and honest and his. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 2 years after the trial, Janet started high school. She'd grown taller, her features sharpening into young adulthood. She had friends. She did well in her classes. She joined the drama club and discovered a talent for stage management that surprised them both. One evening, helping Oliver prepare dinner, she mentioned that her school counselor had suggested she might benefit from speaking to a therapist who specialized in family trauma. "Do you think I need therapy?" she asked, her tone curious rather than defensive. "I think everyone could benefit from therapy," Oliver said, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry. "It's not about needing it like medicine. It's about having someone outside the situation to talk to, someone who can give you tools for processing complicated feelings." "Would you be upset if I went?" Oliver set down the knife and looked at his daughter. "Janet, I would never be upset about you taking care of your mental health. If you want to try therapy, I'll support that 100%. She started sessions the following week. Oliver dropped her off, waited in the car for the hour, then drove her home. They developed a ritual, stopping for ice cream afterward, not talking about the session unless Janet wanted to, just enjoying each other's company. The therapist says I'm emotionally well-adjusted considering everything that happened. Janet mentioned one evening over chocolate mint chip. She says you did a good job. Oliver felt a warmth spread through his chest. You did the hard work. I just showed up. Yeah, but you showed up consistently. That matters. They ate their ice cream in comfortable silence, and Oliver thought about all the small moments that had brought them here. The late-night talks when Janet couldn't sleep. The weekend spent exploring their new neighborhood. The honest conversations about Lucy, about the trial, about feelings that were messy and complicated and didn't have easy answers. He'd shown up. Day after day, he'd shown up. And apparently, that had been enough. 3 years after the trial, Oliver was promoted again at the distribution center, now assistant manager, with real authority and a salary that let them start saving money again. Janet was 16, learning to drive, talking about colleges she might want to attend. They rarely talked about Lucy anymore. She existed in the background of their lives, a shadow that had grown fainter with time. Oliver knew she was still in prison, knew she'd been denied early parole. Beyond that, he didn't keep track. Her life had diverged from theirs completely, and that separation felt healthy and right. One Saturday afternoon, Oliver was fixing a leaky faucet when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Hello, Mr. Weller? This is Thomas Brennan. I was your ex-wife's attorney. Oliver set down his wrench, his stomach tightening automatically at the name. What do you want? Lucy asked me to reach out. She wants to speak with Janet. She's written several letters that haven't been answered, and she's hoping you might encourage Janet to at least read them. Oliver's jaw clenched. 3 years of peace, 3 years of rebuilding, and now this. My daughter is 16 years old, Oliver said carefully. She's old enough to make her own decisions about whether she wants contact with her mother. I'm not going to encourage or discourage her either way. If Lucy wants to reach out to Janet, that's between the two of them. But don't call me again. He hung up without waiting for a response. That evening, he told Janet about the call. She listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. Do you think I should talk to her? Janet asked. I think you should do whatever feels right to you, Oliver said. There's no obligation here. You don't owe her anything. But if you're curious, if you have questions, if you want some kind of closure, those are all valid reasons to consider it. Janet thought about it for several days. Finally, she came to Oliver with her decision. I'm not ready yet, she said. Maybe someday. But right now, I'm happy with the life we've built. I don't want to complicate it by opening that door. Oliver respected her choice. They continued building their life together, a life that was normal and stable and occasionally even joyful. Janet got her driver's license. Oliver started dating someone from work, taking it slow, letting Janet set the pace for when she was ready to meet someone new in their lives. Time moved forward. The past receded, and Oliver learned something important. Healing wasn't a destination. It was a process, ongoing and imperfect, but possible. 5 years after the trial, Janet graduated high school. Oliver sat in the bleachers, watching his daughter cross the stage to receive her diploma, and felt a complex mixture of pride and grief. Pride for who she'd become. Grief for the mother who wasn't here to see it, who'd chosen greed over family and lost everything as a result. After the ceremony, Janet found him in the crowd, her graduation cap askew and her smile wide. We did it, she said, hugging him tightly. You did it, Oliver corrected. I just provided snacks and transportation. She pulled back, rolling her eyes. Dad, we did it together. Stop being modest. They took photos with Rachel and Janet's friends. They went to dinner at a restaurant Janet picked out. They talked about her upcoming freshman year at Ohio State, about her plans to study psychology, about the apartment she'd share with a roommate. Late that night, back at their house, their home, Oliver found Janet sitting on the back porch steps, looking at the garden she'd maintained for the past few years. The tomatoes were already showing small green fruits. The flowers she planted were blooming in yellows and purples. Can I ask you something? Janet said as Oliver sat down beside her. Always. Do you think Mom regrets it? What she did? Oliver considered the question. He'd thought about it himself over the years, turning it over in his mind during quiet moments. I think she regrets getting caught, he said finally. I think she regrets the consequences. Whether she regrets the actual intent, the actual planning, I honestly don't know. And I'm not sure it matters anymore. It matters to me, Janet said softly. I want to believe she loved us, even if she made terrible choices. I want to believe there was something real there once. Oliver put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Then believe that. You get to choose what you hold on to and what you let go of. If believing she loved us helps you, then hold on to that. It doesn't change what happened, but it doesn't have to poison your memories of the good times either. They sat there as darkness fell, as stars began appearing overhead, as the sounds of the neighborhood settled into nighttime quiet. Father and daughter, survivors both, looking forward to a future they'd built together from the wreckage of the past. It wasn't the life Oliver had planned. It wasn't the family he'd thought he'd have. But it was real. It was honest. It was theirs. And in the end, that was more valuable than any fantasy he'd once believed in. The house that had felt wrong 5 years ago was long gone, sold to new owners who knew nothing of its history. This house, modest, ordinary, filled with the accumulated debris of daily life, this house felt right, because it was built on truth instead of lies, on trust instead of betrayal, on the foundation of hard choices and harder consequences, all faced together. Oliver looked at his daughter, no longer the frightened 13-year-old who'd warned him about danger, but a young woman ready to step into her own future, and felt something that had been absent for too long. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of genuine contentment. The knowledge that they'd survived the worst and come out stronger. The certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. I'm proud of you, Oliver said quietly. Not just for graduating, for everything. For being brave enough to speak up when it mattered. For being strong enough to heal. For being you. Janet leaned her head against his shoulder. You too, Dad. You could have given up. You could have become bitter or angry or closed off. But you didn't. You stayed kind. You stayed present. You showed me what it means to move forward with dignity. They sat there together as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who'd walked through fire and emerged transformed. The past was behind them, not forgotten, but no longer defining. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility and promise. And in that moment, sitting on the back porch of their modest house in their quiet neighborhood, Oliver Weller felt something he'd almost forgotten was possible. He felt lucky, not despite everything that had happened, but because of it, because the ordeal had stripped away illusions and left only what was real, because he'd learned who he could trust and who he couldn't, because he had his daughter alive and whole and ready to take on the world. The house didn't feel wrong anymore. It felt exactly like home.